Team, welcome to the Process Podcast. Today I'm sitting down with Kyle Ruth. He is one of the top strength coaches in the world of CrossFit, working with some of the biggest names in the sport, including once upon a time myself. But he and I today sit down to talk about blood flow restriction training, a very specific niche topic, something that I've been experimenting a lot more with. And in today's episode, we dive into the different protocols, how you can get the most out of it, and we'll use yours truly, myself, as a case study so you can actually follow along on my Instagram to see how I'm implementing this in my training. Enjoy. Kyle Ruth, welcome back to the Process Podcast, my friend. How are we doing?
I'm doing well. It's been a while. I haven't been on here in 2.5 months.
I was just thinking as I made that introduction, I reckon this has got to be episode 4 or 5 with you on the podcast. Would you say?
At least four that I can remember for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, does
that make me the most frequented non-coastal guest?
Yeah. Hands down.
I love it. Champion. Yeah. Another thing for victory.
Landslide victory. I'm trying to even think who'd even come close to a second. I've had Andre Houdet on a couple of times.
He's a good dude. I know him. I know him kind of well.
You know him very well.
Yep.
In fact, there's a lot of guests that come on the show who have been a link or a connection through you when we were working together as coaches. I mean, as coach and athlete. I mean, Lockie Ralston, I just hung out with him in March, because he's gone on this prolific business journey with his gym locker room. I'm on a similar journey with ours, and we now become great friends and spend all this time together, and that all came through you. And so we kind of always joke and laugh about where the origins of our relationship came from, and it was the fact that we both shared the same coach.
Yeah, so and you guys both wanted to be elite level CrossFitters. So here we are, and it all spanned from everyone wanting to be an elite CrossFitter, and you still kind of are because you beat me in the open. So
Kyle, I did not want to bring that up in this podcast, but I appreciate you addressing the pink elephant early on. But we shall move swiftly on from that. I'm sure quarterfinals is going to be where you shine your light and completely trounce me.
We'll see. I haven't done much training,
Okay, yeah, I'm loving the fact that you tore your rec fem. Obviously, not loving the fact that you tore your rec fem, but that's been a massive advantage for me. Anyhow, Kyle, speaking of injuries and being broken and chasing elite performance. We have a very specific podcast topic today, and it's all about BFR, blood flow restriction training. Now, context here. We're going to break down what BFR actually is. So if you're seeing this as a title and you're like, what the hell is that? What does that mean? Don't you worry. Kyle is the guy. He's a man when it comes to BFR. You are still basically my only resource for BFR related questions, which come up periodically. You probably get texts from me kind of like every 8 months where I'm like, Kyle, update on your protocols. What are you doing? What are you using? How can I benefit from this? But context, history of this is obviously, Kyle, we've introduced this many times in the podcast. You and I worked together for, I think, 7 years. You was my coach, and what an amazing journey I had as an athlete, but also you were massively influential on my coaching career. And so much of what I know now stem from the things that you taught me and what we did together as coach and athlete. And back in the day, because I will say this is I feel like in the context of application of BFR, especially to CrossFit high level performance, there was no one else doing that. Like, when I'd be wrapping my powerlifting cuffs around my legs, so I didn't actually have proper cuffs, everyone would be like, what the fuck are you doing? And I actually, most of the time I was like, I don't actually know what I'm doing, but I believe in what I'm doing. So I'm going to keep on doing it because I'm getting some pretty good results from it.
Yeah, I was told to do this by someone I trust, so I'm going to continue to do it, even though I have no idea what the hell's going on.
Basically, and it's not that you didn't explain to me; you did explain to me, but your very biomechanical brain was just a little bit too advanced for me at the time. That the concepts we were getting into, I was like, okay, fuck it, sounds like it makes sense and it's working. So I'm at a place right now. I'm turning 39 this year. I've had multiple knee operations and surgeries throughout the years, all really from, a previous sport in rugby. But also having become a father recently, sleep is a little bit more compromised and finding recovery is more compromised. But I'm still signing up, doing competitions. I've got a Hyrox race coming up in 7 weeks. We both just did the Open. And I'm just always looking for ways to get an edge in my training that allows me to continue to make gains within the different facets that are important to me. But whilst also respecting the fact that I've got this injury history. I have these flare-ups that come up quite regularly. How can I implement tools and strategies to allow me to continue to make progress without beating myself up? Because I'm very much in that bucket of life right now where it's like I just don't want to be living in pain. I don't want to be pushing through pain. That ship has very much sailed. Pain
Well,
in terms of
when it
pushing myself.
yeah. So that's what I was going to say is that
Yeah.
that's I think the big caveat with BFR. So you're a great use case for blood flow restriction training, right? It's going to be a tool that's going to allow you to get really, really powerful exercise adaptations, really powerful training adaptations with lower loads, lower volumes. I have always equated it to basically like a training amplifier, right? So what it allows you to do is just turn the gain up or turn the volume up on, not volume in terms of reps, but like turn the volume of adaptation up. So it just basically like it's pouring fuel on the fire. It's the best way to put it. So for
So
someone
what is it?
yeah, so BFR is basically a tourniquet, right? You're restricting your goal with blood flow restriction training is to restrict the amount of blood that flows out of the limb. Okay, so while we're just going to imagine that you're using a pair of powerlifting knee wraps, right, or voodoo floss for people that are in the CrossFit world. What you do is you basically at the proximal part of the limb, so like at the top of the shoulder or at the top of the thigh, you're going to wrap around, and you're just going to create this. You're going to create some tension, and your goal there is to allow some blood to still get into the limb. All right. So you're going to create this kind of pumping effect, but not come back out of the limb. And basically the way that it works from like a physiology perspective is you have the heart is pushing blood into the limb in it's a stronger push than it is the blood returning back from the limb. And so as a result, you basically like build up a lot of blood. And if you've ever done any like a bodybuilding session, right? You've had this massive pump in your quads or massive pump in your biceps. It's kind of recreating a very similar sensation and similar feeling and similar physiology to that. So really what BFR is doing is it's just changing the physiology of what's going on inside of the limb during exercise and shifting it so that fatigue occurs faster. Now, anytime you want to elicit a training adaptation, you have to create fatigue. Like that is the key, right? If you want to grow muscle mass, if you want hypertrophy, you have to reach local fiber fatigue to actually create hypertrophy. If you want to get zone 2 adaptations, right? You have to spend enough time on the bike that you create some fatigue from zone 2. Like it's not going to be, 20 minutes on the bike erg and you checked your zone 2 box. You got to spend enough time there to actually create some localized fatigue from it. So what BFR allows you to do is by reducing that blood flow out of the limb is you just reach that fatigue point a little bit faster. And so it lets you do less reps, lower loads, and still create that hypertrophy signaling or lower total time, like on your zone 2 work or your conditioning blocks, less total time to get essentially the same adaptations. We can go down that rabbit hole, and it's a deep, deep rabbit hole. They're not exactly the same adaptations, but from a functional perspective, your endurance improves, your hypertrophy improves, and strength improves. So they're essentially the same adaptations.
Okay, I love that. That's actually probably the best breakdown of what BFR actually is that I've ever heard. So well done, Kyle. 1 for 1. Now, you mentioned a few things there. You talked about hypertrophy. You using two
Yep.
examples, hypertrophy and zone 2 adaptation. So, but then you also threw the word strength in there at the end. So, when we look at like the strength continuum, and then when we look at, energy systems, what application does BFR have and what can it actually improve? Like, can it improve power? Can it improve top end strength? So break that down for me.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing is that at this point, you would be hard pressed to find some training quality that BFR hasn't been shown in the literature to improve in some way. That's not to say that it improves strength, for it will improve strength, but it's not to say that it will improve strength more than heavy lifting, right? But there's some research that shows that the adaptations to light load BFR training, 50 to 60% of your 1RM are equivalent to training with 80 to 85% of your 1RM without the volume even having to be matched, And so when you look at it, I've seen research that absolute power or max power, like, you get on a Wingate or a biker and do a 20-second max effort sprint or a 30-second max effort sprint. There's plenty of research that shows that it improves max effort sprinting. If you want to do that and you do one every 3 minutes, so repeated sprinting, it shows that it can, depending on the application, you can improve repeated sprinting. If you want to use it to improve a 2K road time trial, there's lots of really cool research on how to apply BFR to improve, something in that I would almost call them like the VO2 time domain or like the severe time domain. It can improve that. Hypertrophy is like one of the most obvious ones. It really does augment muscle growth. And so even I found this to be really interesting is BFR is the number one thing that when I think about BFR, the number one thing that I think about that it does is drive hypertrophy. Because even if you put it on cyclists and they do low intensity biking, where you put it on, older athletes or even just older population, like inactive people, and you have them walk on a treadmill, they get hypertrophy in their legs from walking with BFR. Like it's that potent in growing muscle mass. And so really it's kind of like you'd be hard pressed to find anything that it wouldn't improve. The caveat to that is that no matter what it's improving, it's going to drive hypertrophy. Like that's the thing it will definitely do.
Okay, so when you say all that, it just sounds like this thing that, like, why is the whole world not doing it? Because it basically sounds like it's almost like an efficiency cheat code, right? So it's like time pressed human beings who don't have a whole amount of time to get their training done. We're saying that we can achieve similar adaptations by doing potentially less sets, less volume required. And it's almost like shortcutting a lot of the work that we need to do in getting the same benefit. So why are we not all just doing this?
Well, this is what I tell everybody whenever I introduce BFR to one of my clients. I'm like, hey, I want you to understand, like, there are massive potential benefits from you training with BFR, but it's not a shortcut because it does sound like one. Here's the problem is the level of metabolic pain that you will go through doing BFR training. It is equivalent to doing the same amount of training, just all packed into the shorter time window. So like a great example is like if we had you do max rep back squats at 75% and you just went to failure, like you would build up a lot of metabolic pain in the quads. Like the thing that you might reach like muscular failure, but you also probably would just quit before you actually reached muscular failure, right? You get to the point you're like, I'm not doing this anymore. My legs hurt too bad. BFR makes that happen sooner. And so that's how it drives adaptations. It's how that's the fuel on the fire for driving adaptations is it just makes fatigue happen sooner. And it really does kind of concentrate fatigue because if you think about it, got to put my mug down for to actually like kind of show this. So you restrict the blood coming out of the limb, right? You've got all this blood coming in, you're producing all this metabolite. So like, let's say you're sprinting hard on the bike, and you're producing lactate and hydrogen ions and all of this metabolic waste, but you're also restricting the blood flow from leaving the limb. And so all of that lactate and hydrogen and all of that acidity gets trapped inside the leg. And you can imagine what happens when you do that. Like it's just such a painful experience. The other thing is, it reduces in the moment, it reduces power output, right? Mm. So if you're training someone for performance, it's a great physiological tool. It's a great way to like augment certain aspects of someone's, performance. Like you want to improve endurance, it's a great way to improve endurance. But just doing BFR won't necessarily lead to performance improvement. You still have to do time trials and you still have to train at, specific paces and things like that, because there are also neuromuscular adaptations that occur. And so you can't just do BFR and expect that there will be a one-to-one performance improvement just because you improved your physiological endurance, right? It would be like, this is a little bit of a high level concept, but it would be like expecting you raise your VO2 max by, 3 milliliters per kilogram per minute by doing this really hard. You did your Norwegian 4x4 intervals for, you did a 4-week block, you raised your VO2 max by 3. and then all of a sudden you expect to improve your 20-minute watt time trial. It
Yeah.
might, but it also might not because you haven't trained at the specific paces that are required for that. You see where I'm going.
Yes.
But like I said, it's a little bit of a high level concept.
Well, I think this is what we're about to dig into next. We're going to use me as a case study and where I'm at right now with my goals with training and life. And you're going to basically break this down for us. So I think we're going to be able to like use what you just said and actually give us some real life applications. Because, okay, I just want to just share. So I just whipped out the BFR cuffs the other day, and I was like, right, I want to start getting back into this, exploring more techniques and strategies. That's why I reached out to you straight away. I'd already done one little BFR or a couple of BFR sessions, and I'm like, I feel like I'm kind of just guessing, and I don't like just guessing. I want to actually speak to an expert and make sure that if I'm going to do this real painful shit, I'm actually doing the right stuff. So I just did a real simple protocol the other day, right? And I put on the BFR cuffs. I'd probably say to like a 7 out of 10 tension, and I just did 4-minute EMOM. I did 15 goblet squats with 20 kg dumbbell. And never locking out a full extension, so tension always on, and then basically rest the remainder of the minute. So it roughly worked out to be 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. And after 4 minutes, mate, I was a mess. I was in more
move, right?
I was in more pain than I was after 26.3.
Oh, for sure. Now, you were in more pain temporarily, but I'm sure you had way less DOMs the next day.
I actually felt what was really nice. I felt like I had, because, okay, for those that know me and like how I move anatomically, like when I squat, I'm very much a hip dominant squatter, right? So hips go back, knees don't translate over my toes all that much. So I always find it very hard to feel my quads with a lot of squatting based movements. And I know some of that is structural limitations, but my quads felt like they just felt that like they'd done work for the rest of the day. And I was even lying in bed, like 9 hours later, and I was like, "Oh, it actually feels like my quads got a really good pump today." And I felt, and the next day I woke up, felt great.
Ed, I call it BFR leg. There is just a different post training sensation when you've done BFR, but it's not DOMs. Like, yes, BFR can create DOMs, right? But I actually think in some sense it's protective of DOMs. And so for someone like you who wants to be able to do some really cool stuff, wants to be able to race Hyroxes and handle all the lunges that are involved and all the wall ball and all the sled pushes and all that running volume on top of it. One of the things that I think BFR affords you is a bit of a protective effect against, metabolic induced muscle damage. And it really, the more you use it, the more protective it becomes. But we should dig in. There's a lot to, I think there's a lot to unpack for what like the best protocols are for BFR. But I think it would be more instructive to just kind of dig in, like how might we integrate it into your specific use case, like your use case with your knee injuries and the fact that you have struggled with hypertrophy in your legs because of the knee injuries. Like pain is one of the things that almost like inhibits muscle activation, which inhibits hypertrophy downstream from there. So like you have all this kind of like neural inhibition that's going on that prevents hypertrophy. But like you just said, you can use BFR and almost like work around that to some degree. So from that perspective, there's a use case for you where just using BFR to catch a pump is going to be kind of effective for you. Yeah. Like it's going to be one of the things that really does get blood flow and muscle growth to those tissues. And I think it's kind of like a self-reinforcing thing. But okay, let's talk a little bit about what you're trying to do. I mean, if I were going to like intake you again, which I'm full, by the way, Ed, so you can't come on board. If I were going to intake you again, some of the questions I would have are like, okay, what are you doing right now to train the Hyrox specific movements and strength for Hyrox? What does that look like from a lunging, wall ball, heavy squat perspective and from the sled perspective?
Okay, well, so I've just done the CrossFit Open, as you know, but my training leading into the Open wasn't very Open specific. I was just kind of touching on the skill movements, but I really wasn't doing a whole amount of like CrossFit specific Metcons.
Is that a humble brag because you beat me?
I mean, you can interpret that however you want. But we're 7 weeks out from a Hyrox right now.
Yep.
This will be my third Hyrox Pro. My first one I finished in 1 hour 15, and that was like doing very little Hyrox training. That was like still pushing hard cross at Metcons, and like I would say my levels of like lactate tolerance were pretty good back then. I was pretty good at suffering, and like I just like half that paced it horribly, but just had enough hard training in my locker to be able to like grit my teeth and get through the race.
Yeah, you had the base.
I had the base, yeah. And then obviously
Yeah.
3 years later, maybe just a bit more than 3 years later, I did my second Hyrox Pro. Definitely wasn't training very hard. Kind of just thought I could just like coast in. And, like I still remembered like some pacing issues that I had. I'm like, I'll just change my strategy and it'll be totally fine. Did not do anywhere near enough run volume. Went down with really bad cramp at the 6K mark. My last 2Ks were like 7 kilometer paces. Like,
That's what happened to me I did a team Hyrox, and that's what happened to me. I caught the cramp in the double kettlebell, the kettlebell farmer's carry. I caught double quad cramps in there. I still don't know why. And then the last run after that was so miserable.
So savage. So basically I went from a 115 to a 122.
Okay.
And I had a goal of that second one being a sub 110, which is in hindsight a totally unrealistic goal. So in this third one, the goal is to beat my first Hyrox time of 1 hour 15. Now, history, my running is better than it's ever been. I set a 10K PR. I would say
shortly after our podcast.
Shortly after our podcast. And I went through like a good 12-week run progression for that. So I'm comfortably running up to 15Ks. I've been doing the other week I did like a 2K warm up, then I did at lactate threshold. So kind of at the target pace I want to be. I think I could run this out, which is around a 4:45. Eight sets of 1K at that pace, followed by a 90-second rest, and I was able to do that for 8 sets, and then a 2K run cool down after that, and was like comfortable.
I think Ryan has suggested that as his like test for Hyrox pace, and if you can hold that.
I listened to your podcast, the Stimulus Matters podcast on Hyrox. He suggested that, and that kind of informed, okay, I want to see if I can build up to that. And if I can do that, then, so I'm at a point now where I feel like isolated running and doing threshold work is actually not what I need. I need to start like, doing some more compromise stuff and start to blend them together. Because when I think about my last race, the stations that I feel like really bottlenecked me and slowed me was the lunges.
Okay.
Was burpee broad jumps. And relative to my first Hyrox, my wall pace, I think I finished a minute slower than my first Hyrox.
The burpee broad jumps really surprises me about you. I wouldn't expect the burpee broad jump to be a big challenge for you.
So the problem was that basically I've got this chondromalacia in my left knee. So I get like this rubbing of the patella onto the femur, and that's the only thing that caused me pain. And it's literally like a 45-degree angle. I get a bite of pain above it and below it, totally fine. But the burpee broad jump landing is literally at that exact angle. So basically I did 0 burpee broad jumps in my training and just thought I'd just jump into race, be totally fine. What I actually found was that it was the jumping part of the broad jump that I think that's actually what I think that suddenly rise in lactate because of using fast twitch fibers that I hadn't been training. Everything I've been doing was super slow. So the activation of fast twitch fibers, I think, then had this like sudden surge in lactate production on the burpee broad jumps. And I was just basically, I couldn't recover from that.
And think about all the extra tension that you would have been carrying because you were trying to avoid the pain. So, pain's going to create that neural inhibition that we were talking about. Yeah, that makes some sense. Okay, so one of the applications of BFR that I think is really interesting. A PT shared this with me back in like 2022, 2023. It's called BFR pain gating, right? It's like a gate, like preventing.
I'm writing notes, by the way, Kyle, because this is an unusual podcast, because this is actually like, I'm basically on a Kyle Ruth mentorship call right now.
Yes, to some degree, this is how the mentorship calls go. So one of the use cases is pain gating. And basically it's like the best way I can describe it. And I would recommend that you go do research on this before you integrate, because this is not something that I use with my athletes because I'm not a PT. So pain is kind of outside my scope. But basically what you do is you're going to put the BFR on. I don't remember what the pressure would be. I would assume it would be like that 70 to 80% pressure range. And you're going to take a leg extension machine. You're going to go to full extension, and then you're going to bring it back a few degrees. So like maybe you're at 120, 130 degrees of knee flexion, and you're going to just hold that. It's an isometric hold. I'm sure that the literature has certain, durations at this point, the pain gate begins, but basically it's blocking some of the pain signaling.
Yeah.
It's not solving the problem. It's not going to regrow the cartilage for your chondromalacia patella or anything like that. But what it will do is it will make it so that some of the neural inhibition could be turned down. So that's one use case right away.
I'm going to say straight away, yes. I mean, isometrics have been the one thing. Isometrics on the edge of pain without actually triggering it and slowly getting closer to the pain point over 2 to 3 sets, so about 20 to 30 seconds, has been the best thing for reducing the feeling of pain in the actual session. And you know what? As we started this conversation today, knowing that we're about to speak about BFR, I was like, I should just BFR my isometrics and probably get an even more potent response. So
yes,
I'm going to say straight away, I would agree.
So what it's going to do, at least this is how I understand the physiology of it, is that it reduces afferent nerve signaling. So the BFR, the isometrics don't do that. The isometrics reduce pain in a completely different way. But adding the BFR on top of the isometrics reduces afferent, or the nerve signal coming back to the spinal cord that's carrying the pain signal, and just turns that volume down a little bit. So again, it's not going to solve your injury, right? There's not much you can do outside of some of the really new tech for regrowing cartilage and stuff that's like just now starting to come out. It's not going to solve any of that stuff, but it will make it so that you can train burpee broad jumps in a lower pain environment, and therefore potentially create better economy, you know what I mean? Like, it's going to make it so that you can do these things and potentially handle them a little bit better. So that would be one potential use case that I would see right away for before any of your burpee broad jump sessions. Just like tack that in there as part of your warm up. And we were talking about using BFR as a time saver. That's not a time saver. I mean, that's a chunk that you're going to have to add at the beginning. And I can't remember if it was 3 or 5 sets. Go look at the research.
Yeah.
Now you're surface level aware of what it is. Go look at the research and start plugging that one in. So that would be like phase 1 for your burpee broad jump training. The other thing that I think you could do is I don't know exactly how I would structure this, but I think you could do BFR burpee broad jumps, or do burpee broad jumps with what's called post-interval IPC. So this is where this is one of my favorite tools, and it's my favorite because it's painful. So basically,
IBC,
ischemic preconditioning, even though you're doing it post. So I guess technically it would be ischemic post conditioning, but
yeah.
Basically you're going to inflate your cuffs to 100%, but you do it after the interval. So you get done, let's say you do 1K biker at FTP into 20-meter burpee broad jump, assuming that your knees can handle, the volume of that. And then immediately put the cuffs on and go to 100% pressure. And then you're going to stew in that for 2 to 3 minutes. And so basically what you're doing, you're trapping all that metabolite inside the leg. And basically what you're doing is capturing all that lactate and that metabolite inside the tissue. And as a result, when you let it go, your body's getting a little bit better at dealing with it. It upregulates the enzymes that help to manage high acidity. It upregulates some of the, some of the buffering that regulates acidity, and it's just going to make it better in those tissues, right? So if it was your legs, which is what you said, that really took the brunt of the burpee broad jumps, then that right there would be one of the ways that I would consider using BFR to address that sort of like lactate shuttling component of the burpee broad jump.
Okay, so let's break this down. So basically, because that's almost exactly the session I did yesterday, minus the BFR IPC. So let's say I'm specifically working on the burpee broad jump in a session. So we're doing like a pre-fatigue with a bike, and then we're going into some burpee broad jumps. So basically at this point in time, there's metabolites in the legs. There's probably some lactate production as well. We whack on the cuffs and we go real tight. How long are we going for?
It's 2 to 3 minutes is what a lot of the post IPC research, the post interval research suggests. I've gone as long as 5 minutes, but I think you might just be reaching a diminishing returns point. And I don't have anything to, I don't have any like personal anecdotes to support that. I've done, 30-second echo sprint right into 100% IPC for 3 minutes, few rounds of that. And it's very potent. I'll tell you that.
Are we taking those cuffs off straight away and then going straight into the next interval?
No, you would want to rest for just a little bit, because what you don't want to do is you don't want the BFR to compromise the speed and integrity of the burpee broad jumps in the next round. So this is kind of what I was touching on earlier when I was saying this is kind of like a high level concept. When you're training your burpee broad jumps for Hyrox, you want to be training them at the pace that you're going to be doing them, or your target pace for your Hyrox. That's neuromuscular efficiency, right? You're trying to build economy in the pattern. And so if you're training them slow because you're really fatigued every time you go into them, then you're going to be training, you're going to show up and you're going to do them slow because that's what you've been training. It's like your brain kind of defaults to those neuromuscular patterns. It'd be like if you only ever did like fatigue based running, you always did pre-fatigued running. And so as a result, you always ran at like 4:30 per K, and your goal's 4 minute per K. And the first time you go to run, and like, yeah, there's no pre-fatigue, but you also don't know what it feels like to run 4:30 per K.
Yeah.
Exact same concept for the burpee broad jumps or any of the movements that are in between the runs in a Hyrox.
Okay, Carl, just to like finish off the IPC piece. Okay, so we know the protocol now. The cuffs go on 2 to 3 minutes after. Take them off, rest a little bit so you're fresh enough to hit the next set at the same speed, which is ideally the speed you want to hit it in the race. What are the adaptations? What's that going to get me better at in the long term? You know, post doing that session, how's that going to help me?
Well, so really what you're doing is increasing the amount of lactate and hydrogen that's inside the limb. And so you're increasing acidity. And you're basically making it so that the body is getting better and better and better after each session at dealing with elevated levels of acidity. And what when you described what happened to you during your last race in the burpee broad jumps, I think I agree with you that that's basically what happened. You activated all this fast twitch, you dumped a bunch of metabolite in there, and then you weren't ready to clear it. And so by going through this process, you're getting better at clearing it because you're dealing with more and more and more metabolite each time. So I think that would be one of the great ones. Eventually, what I would do, I think, as you get closer to the race, that session might actually include, so you would go, your pre-fatigue bike, you do your burpee broad jump, you do your IPC, and then you would run at like a recovery pace.
Yeah.
For, like a 500 meter run at recovery pace, and then take that into your next interval. When I say recovery pace, it's like, how fast are you going to run in the rock zone?
Yeah.
Right.
I don't have a pace, but
no, you may not have a pace, but you know what that feel is, right? That super compromised running feel where it's like, I'm running to get to that, big dome to run underneath it. And once I get there, I'm going to settle into my pace once I get on the course, but that recovery pace, that's what I would run at. So you're just kind of training your body to recycle and consume and use that lactate and use that metabolite through I think it's called the Cori cycle, to recycle some of the lactate and actually use it as fuel for your next run, because you're going to have another one after you get done with the burpee broad jumps.
So what's interesting is basically you just added a layer to a protocol that I'd already created for myself and made it even more potent. So basically what I was doing just yesterday was basically doing a ramping protocol on the bike for 2 minutes. So, deliberately producing some lactate, hitting the 20 meters of burpee broad jumps at the pace I want to in a race. And then I was basically doing a 2-minute bike erg at active recovery pace, with the focus of lactate clearance. You're just basically adding an extra dimension to this and saying, all right, throw the cuffs on before that active recovery, make it even more potent, and it's going to challenge your body even more to clear even more lactate than you produce.
Drive the lactate levels up even higher so that you're clearing from a higher point.
Yes.
And a big part of my coaching philosophy and how I work with elite athletes in CrossFit is that I often try to make training harder than competition. Now, sometimes that's really challenging, right? Especially in CrossFit, where you don't really know what you're preparing. You have like a broad sense of what you're preparing them for, but you don't know the specifics. But in Hyrox, like we can definitely train you where you're going to achieve much higher lactate levels in training and then have to clear them. And really, if you think about, like, I've always thought about Hyrox as a threshold race, right?
Yeah.
It's like maybe just above lactate threshold, but it's like pretty much right there. And you have these big spikes where you're probably getting a lot of lactate dumped during each of the stations. So the better you are at producing during the station and then clearing during the run, the better you're going to perform in a Hyrox.
Mate, Carl, I've got goosebumps right now because I love talking about this stuff and it's so good.
Yeah.
Like, I can 100% see straight away how this IPC protocol is going to be potent. Okay, let's move on from that. I've
Yep.
already got that, and I can already see how I can apply that to various stations within a race. I can basically pick out those bottleneck stations to me and basically do this exact protocol. Um,
Yeah. I don't think I would use it for the sled pull, right?
I
Because the
feel
sled
like the
pulls.
sled's not. I feel like I'm okay with the sleds. Like, I feel like that
Yeah.
doesn't, create too much issue for me. Okay, cool. What else, Kyle? Knowing my goals and what I need, I think I should also add in that I know the things I talked about that are bottlenecking me in a Hyrox race. I just talked about the stations. I'm also not saying that I'm a great runner. So I think that, if there is something that's also going to improve, my aerobic capacity, it's going to allow me to better handle the runs. Like, I'm 100% down for it as well.
We'll talk about that. But I think more important, I think a better application for BFR for you is going to be in your lunge.
Yeah.
I've actually done this with a guy who was a 60-minute Hyrox guy, and it was potent. I mean, it was one of those things where the lunge was one of his weakest. He'd had an adductor strain um, prior to us working together, and so his one of his adductors was just weak, and so the lunge was kind of his weak point. And so this is how we started. Is we started with unloaded BFR lunges, and I wish I could remember the exact protocol. I'd pull it up, but it'd ruin the we'd ruin the podcast. But we started with just kind of volume, and it was time domain based. I want to say we did like 40 minutes, not 40 minutes, 40 seconds of continuous lunging, 20 seconds of rest, and did a few intervals of that. And it was all unloaded, but we very quickly got to loaded with the sandbag, started light, 20 pounds, 40 pounds, 60 pounds, and kind of built our way up.
And the
And
cuff staying on the whole time.
yes. So this
Okay.
was
Yeah.
this was continuous pressure. And from a pressure perspective, I did bring the pressure down a little bit as we went. So when we started with the unloaded, the pressure was highest. We would work around 80 to 85% pressure, which is really, really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But when the weight is lighter, the load is lighter, generally you want to have a higher pressure. That's like kind of a principle for BFR training. So if you're completely unloaded, you might be in the 80 to 85% pressure range for the lower body. For upper body, it's always a little bit lower than that. But then as we added load, we brought the pressure down a little bit as the load came up, because that's kind of just the principle of BFR training. But we eventually, our goal was to get to covering the distance of the Hyrox lunge with BFR in one session per week. Now, keep in mind, it was just one session per week. We also had another lunge session later in the week that was much more speed focused. So if you think about what you're doing with the BFR, is you're really like, this is a muscular endurance protocol,
Yeah.
right? And the lunges there's two components to the lunges in a Hyrox. One, you want to go fast enough to actually turn in a decent time. And two, you have to have the endurance to be able to handle, it's a pretty long, I don't remember what the exact distance
100
is off
meters.
the
Yeah.
top of my head. Is it 100? I couldn't
Yeah.
remember if it was 80 or 100, but it's a long distance and a lot of total lunge volume.
Yeah.
So we did that, the BFR session once in the week. And then we had another where it was just more speed oriented. We were even doing some like banded drop lunge type training, more like in the middle of the speed strength curve, like right smack in the middle of that, where we actually worked on like, you know, the speed of movement for the lunge. And then as we got closer to the Hyrox, we started to phase out some of the BFR and just integrated it into training. So from a phasing perspective, when we were probably about 2 weeks out, we dropped the BFR there completely.
Yeah. I agree.
So I used in from that perspective for the lunges, we use the BFR as the base building, the like strength endurance base building for the lunges. And I think for you, it's exactly where you'd want to use it. It's going to create some hypertrophy. You're going to create a lot of fatigue. And then you figure out another place to kind of trade the speed, the neuromuscular speed of the lunge elsewhere in the week.
Yeah. I love it. Okay, cool. So it's quite simple there. You basically, the cuffs are staying on. You're just making the movement more challenging. And then you basically just did a load and intensity progression by just increasing the sandbag load until you got, actually sounds like you went, oh yeah, went to the prescribed load. And yeah,
All
the
the way
goal,
up.
yeah, and the goal, so your litmus, your KPI for this guy was basically, let's be able to hit 100 meters of lunges at a 60-pound bag, I believe it is, at the pace
Not
with BFR.
not continuously and not at
Interval.
pace.
Got
Yes,
it.
it was interval based. So our goal was to accumulate 100 meters
Got it.
of lunging at target load with BFR. It was definitely not at pace. Like there's no way you're doing that,
Yeah.
right? And then elsewhere in the week, you're training the neuromuscular components of it because,
Okay.
like we talked about with the burpee broad jump, when you apply BFR, the fatigue is going to slow you down. Like it's going to slow you way the hell down. When the pain really kicks in, like your lunges get so slow. It's like you're lunging through mud, and it's just not going to be the same stimulus that you need to make your lunges faster. And so you need to train those two things separate if you're going to incorporate active BFR work inside the lunges.
Love it. Making loads of notes for those who are listening. Why is Ed not talking? Because I'm writing all this shit down. Okay. I actually think when we were working together, I think you literally gave me a protocol very similar to this, just with walking lunges. I think because I remember one of my coaches joining me for the session, and we both basically like used the powerlifting wraps, cuffed up hard, and we just had like a continuous walking lunge piece in intervals, and it was savage. Yeah, I remember us like screaming through it.
It's BFR for a CrossFitter. My favorite way to apply is as a finisher.
Yeah.
And my favorite movements are front squats and lunges. So if you were coached by me and you had access to BFR and growing your legs was important in any way, shape, or form, you've probably done some form of BFR finisher for me. I really think it's such a potent tool. And CrossFit really rewards leg endurance and your ability to flush lactate and shuttle lactate out of the legs. Hyrox really rewards your ability to shuttle lactate out of legs, and I think is about as good as it gets for training it. You said okay, so you said lunges were a big one, burpee broad jump. What was the other station that was the wall ball? Okay, so I've done some various wall ball progressions with BFR. The only thing is that I'm not convinced that the legs are always the limiter in wall ball, but that's
No.
true in a CrossFit context. In a Hyrox context, I think the legs are more of the limiter in wall ball. And so
Yeah. I actually find for
one of
me it's always a shoulder limiter.
yeah, almost always for me, it's shoulders.
Yeah.
It's not legs. Like I think early on when people are first getting into CrossFit or first getting into Hyrox, the legs are also one of the limiters in wall ball. But I just think that squatting a 20-pound ball repeatedly with a nice long break, because you let the ball go,
Yeah.
it touches the target. Like I just don't think that hits the legs as hard as some of the other stuff that we've done inside the sport.
I
If you were
also
going to use, go
can
ahead.
I add one thing, Carl? I also find that because when I look at the wall ball movement pattern and what's required to execute it for someone who's strong enough, obviously, to do wall balls, I think it's different enough from running that I feel like the carryover from the fatigue of running doesn't really impact my wall balls that much. So, just for context, like in my last race, I was that guy who was like on the floor on my 8K, just trying to stretch out my calves, and then like my quads were going and my hamstrings were going. So my legs were like, I literally like limped into the wall ball zone. But as soon as I started doing wall balls, it was like totally fine. Like
Yeah,
everything. Obviously,
that's basically
yeah,
what happened to me, Ed. Like was almost identical because I really started cramping up on the farmer's carry, and then for some reason, the next run was awful, and then I got to the wall ball, and I was on team, but I think I ripped off like 45 or 50 unbroken on my set, and I was okay. I was perfectly okay.
yeah,
Like it actually got rid of my cramps to some
yeah.
degree.
My
So
cramps came back trying to cross the finish line. As soon as I went back into anything that looked like the running pattern, my legs just went anyway.
yeah,
High tangent.
yeah. So
Continue.
I think you could use it in wall ball. I've actually done this for CrossFitters quite a bit. I've never done it for a Hyrox athlete, but I love doing like 10. This is so horrible, but it's really good. It's like an EMOM 10, 10 wall ball at the beginning of the minute, and then you bike erg for the remaining time at kind of like I would call it R2, which is like like a mid-range active recovery pace, and you're
Yeah,
doing it with the cuffs on. Cuffs are 60 to 70% pressure. We don't want too much because you are going for 10 minutes. And you're just cycling through it. And you'll accumulate 100 wall ball. And then, 10 minutes total time under cuff. And that's a good way to think about it as well. As your target with the cuffs are going to be somewhere between 10 to 15 minutes when you're of active time. Anything beyond that, and you're starting to get beyond what the what you really should do with the cuffs.
Okay, interesting. Break that down for me. So max
Yeah,
time, 10 minutes, generally speaking.
I'd say max time 15 minutes.
Okay.
There are athletes who I've stretched it beyond that for, especially in the context of doing BFR endurance work. But with active, mixed modal BFR stuff, I kind of think that the 10 to 15-minute time domain, like you're getting a lot of adaptation out of that. As long as the cuff pressure is high enough. If you're going much longer than that, your cuff pressure is probably too low to get a very effective stimulus. Like if you've had them on for 15 or 20 minutes and you're still wearing them and you're okay and walking, like you may have missed the intention of the stimulus of the
Yeah, that's
session.
now a knee sleeve on your thigh. But
Yeah,
could you
quad
do,
sleep.
could you do 15 minutes on, let's say, legs and then 15 minutes on arms? Like, is that okay? Or is it just
Yeah, I don't think there shouldn't be any major issues with that. I've seen one person who switching from lower body to upper body BFR caused them some blood pressure issues, and actually there I've only ever seen that in one person, but I've seen blood pressure issues in two people. So it is really important that, like, this should have been the caveat at the beginning.
yeah,
You need to put a disclaimer at the beginning, like there's inherent risk with BFR, just like there is with any training. But because you're messing with blood pressure, there are certain things that you have to screen for. And I think it's really good. I would recommend that anybody who's going to experiment with BFR not use the powerlifting knee wraps. That's not the right or appropriate way to approach this. I think a much better way is to get a set of Bluetooth pressure regulated cuffs. And the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to have to go through an assessment in there. And inside that assessment, they're going to have a questionnaire that asks, do you have stroke risk? Have you ever had thrombosis, deep vein thrombosis? And they kind of go through the things that are actual, like genuine risks for BFR. And because it's pressure regulated, then you can say, I'm going to work at 70% of my max pressure because it determines your max pressure before
got
you
it.
start. Smart Tools has a great set of cuffs. Saga, their new 2.0 one is pretty resilient. My athlete Toby Buckland's been using them and loving them.
I used the
Uh,
first edition of them, they were good.
so did I. I had some issues with the first
Yeah,
edition.
me
Whenever I
too.
would do IPC, when you go to 100% pressure, some of the cuffs would have some leak issues. But I think it's completely solved on the new 2.0. And I have the Smart Tools, I think 4.0 Bluetooth cuffs. And man, that's a that's a heck of a cuff. It is resilient, stiff, and my legs feel like trash every time I use them.
Okay, love it. Right, Carl, we've broken down now IPC. We talked about the application to lunging and just, continuous, use of them. We broke down a wall ball protocol. I want to just lastly talk about, because at the very start of this, you talked about, using it for like zone 2 adaptation. So
Yep.
let's keep it specific to Hyrox. Obviously running, and there's some erg in there. How could we incorporate BFR work to help us prepare for a Hyrox race?
Well, normally I would recommend specific work, right? I would say, oh, let's put BFR on and run. But I would love to see someone run with a pattern that looks anything like running with a inflated BFR cuff, like your legs would be out here. So it's just not really possible to run well with it. I've seen some research where they do post interval IPC. So you run and then cuff and then run and cuff. But I think of the run piece of a Hyrox as where you're clearing the lactate, not trying to produce it. If you're producing a lot of lactate in the run in a Hyrox, you have gone out too fast. So the way that I would recommend integrating it, especially for someone with a history of knee issues like yourself, is to use the bike erg. And the protocol that I have found, and this is pretty well supported in the research, is a 2 by 10 minute protocol. Cuffs are at about 60% pressure, and pace wise, it's hard to give an exact pace, but it's around a zone 2 pace.
Mhm.
So, for example, when I'm on the bike erg and I'm riding at zone 2, I'm somewhere between 2 minutes and 2:05. That's what keeps my heart rate right in zone 2. And so when I do the 2 by 10 minute BFR protocol, I try to stay somewhere around that 2 minute to 2:05. I do find that I creep up to around the 2:08 mark. So it's 2 by 10 minute, 5 minutes with the cuffs deflated. That's a really simple protocol. Um, I've had some athletes that we go longer. We've gone up to 15 minutes. We've taken the pressure up to 70%. I'm not sure that there's any additional adaptations to that. The research suggests 2 by 10 minute with a 5 minute washout between them. The only other thing I would say is that I've run this for athletes up to 8 weeks continuously, and there seems to be rapid adaptation in the first 4 weeks, and then kind of like a plateau, and then maybe even diminishing returns later on. So I tend to run these for about 6 weeks at a time with a 2 week deload. You want to be doing this going into your race. So if you're 7 weeks out, what I would do is do a 4 week block, a 1 week washout, and then maybe another 2 week block into the race, something like that, or maybe a 3 week block, 2 week washout, 2 week into the race. It just makes your legs feel so much better. The goal's 3 times a week.
3 of those sessions a week.
Yes, that's what the research shows. It's a fantastic. I wish I could remember the title of the paper or the authors. I feel so bad that I that I can't remember it. But they looked at elite level 2K row athletes, and when I say elite level, I think that the fastest rower in the study was a 5:40 2K row. I think he set the world record inside of the study. And that's what they did is they did a 4 week, 2 by 10 minute BFR, 3 days per week. They did it on the rower, but not everyone was able to complete it on the rower because it was too painful. So some of the people did it on the bike erg, and they still improved their row. And I think the adaptations that are really interesting, it seems to be more of a capillary density thing. So a lot of what we talked about was like dealing with metabolite and hypertrophy and all these components. But what's happening with this longer time under pressure type BFR is that you are increasing the growth of blood vessels inside the tissue. So basically you're making it so your body can deliver more blood and oxygen and flush more metabolite back out of the limb. And so rather than using this to really drive high lactate or high metabolite, you're using this to drive that capillary density increase so that you can actually get blood and oxygen into the limbs a little bit better. I would do this as the last piece of your training. This is it's not a cool down because it's definitely, you'll do one and you'll be like, well, that wasn't a cool down, but it should be the last piece of your training because it's going to negatively influence anything else that you try and do within the session.
As you were talking about this, I was thinking, is this going to be a primer? Because I'm thinking, so whilst we're doing it at zone 2 pace, right? And so zone 2 pace without BFR cuffs should really mean that we're not really producing lactate. But is there going to be a production of lactate? You're doing zone 2 pace. Okay, cool. So I think that's an important thing for people to understand is that you're doing a zone 2 pace, but you are going to get almost like threshold adaptations in your legs.
Yeah, I would say I think it's probably sub threshold. It really does build around. You might hit the 5 minute or 6 minute mark and be like, I'm fine. Like, what was all the fuss about? And then you're gonna hit minute 8, 9, and 10 and be like, oh, I might need to stop and deflate these cuffs.
Yeah.
So like it does get really, really, really challenging. I've also found that damper setting plays a huge role here. So if you put it on a low damper, you don't get the same kind of potent stimulus that you do with higher dampers. I wouldn't do it at damper 10. But I guess what I'm saying is like, if you want to get the most out of it, I think somewhere on that bike erg around a damper 3 to 5 is going to be your most efficient.
Love it. Okay, fantastic. My last question is going to be like primers. So applications of what I've been doing, just because my legs feel so good after using it. We've already talked about the pain gating. So I think I hadn't been aware of that term, but I was kind of just using it anyway. But now I'm going to add BFR to it to basically set me up for a really good like training session, especially anything that's lower body. Is there any protocols that you would use as like a quick primer just to get your legs feeling good before, let's say I'm doing a squat session and maybe like heavier strength work, or even just all the stuff we're talking about, more endurance-based sessions?
Yeah. I actually saw a really cool case study where was a guy who's a speed and agility coach for American football players. And he was using just a 5 minute BFR bike. I think it was an Echo actually. I think it was like a fan bike, but a 5 minute bike at self-selected RPE 5. And they were doing it at like that same kind of 60% pressure. It wasn't long enough to get to the point that you're like, well, I'm like really having to tolerate this, but it was long enough that you start to get that like pump feeling a little bit in your legs. And they were using it to simply reduce knee pain in these athletes so that they could have better training sessions, kind of like the pain gating concept. So I saw that as a case study, and I've played around with that, with my hip flexor tear, and I had a hamstring tear last summer. So I've used this just as kind of like a hypertrophy stimulator and like a recovery stimulator before training, and to just make it so like maybe it doesn't hurt as bad while I'm squatting or lunging. And I've used that pretty successfully. The other thing I've done is like if you've got a squatting session, put on some BFR, 40 seconds on, 20 seconds off, 6 rounds, reverse sled drag. Doesn't have to be very heavy, just enough to get a little pump. You don't want to do too much. Like your goal in a primer is never to create fatigue. It's just to get blood flow going and maybe take advantage of some of that nociception or pain reduction that you get from BFR. That's really how I think about it. The only exception to that is if you're someone who really is trying to drive hypertrophy and you can't activate your quads, then maybe you do want to go not to fatigue, but you really want to get a good pump because that's really getting some blood into the tissue. And then when you do your hypertrophy work, it becomes easier to fatigue those tissues.
Yes.
And
so it's almost like a pre-fatigue.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's kind of a very small subset of people, but it is, I mean, I work with 2 of them that we do this where we're trying to get a pump with BFR before they do any squatting work. But I think with everyone else, it's more of a finisher, and that's kind of how I integrate it in CrossFit. And then there are places where we are doing this directly as like a performance training tool. So the lunges, the post interval stuff. Speaking of, I'm about 30 days out from the Del Mar semifinal, which is usually about the time I start ramping up my BFR. So I'll probably be busting out my cuffs for this coming week and starting to do my front squat finisher and my my 2x10-minute zone 2 bike erg, because it really it makes a big difference. Craziest thing, I'll share one quick anecdote.
Yeah.
So Toby was going into Dubai champs in, I guess this would have been 2024, like December 2024. And they announced that there was going to be a bike erg, a 20-minute FTP damper 10. And so I had just read that research on the 2x10 minutes. Like I just reread it pretty recently. And so it was like 3 weeks out. And so we started doing it, and we did a 20-minute damper 10 FTP to kind of figure out where his target would be. I think he hit 333 watts, which is decent, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty solid. We did this 2x10 minute, and there were other components in training, like we trained at target paces and things like we talked about, but he hit 353 in 3 weeks.
So what was it very quick? What was the protocol? So you did the test, established his numbers. How did you then apply those numbers to his 2x10 minutes?
We didn't use those numbers at all in the 2x10 minutes. We used that zone two pace. We trained we trained at, below, and above his 20-minute FTP for various interval durations throughout there as well. And then we would finish with the 2x10, the 3 days per week. And I've never seen that level of improvement on a 20-minute FTP, even over like a 12-week block, let alone in a 3-week block in a well-trained athlete who already has a pretty respectable score.
Yeah. Okay, Kyle, this has been great. I know you're not even, I feel like you're just getting started. You can keep on talking about this shit all day long. But for the purpose of this podcast, which is to basically give everyone, well, not a low level, pretty high level introduction to what BFR. And I think there's plenty of stuff that people can take from this to integrate into their own training. You've already mentioned a couple of BFR brands. There are plenty out there. I think I need to upgrade and get myself a decent pair as well. And I think there's loads of things that I want to sit down right away now and implement into my 7-week Hyrox protocol. I definitely think pain gating, putting some stuff into my primers for my knee issues. I'm definitely going to play around with IPC, the lunge and wall protocol, 100%. I'm going to add that in there. Why the hell not? It's just going to be even more potent than what I'm doing already. And I really want to give this 2x10 with 5-minute rest piece. I'm going to make sure I just have the time. I need to stop fucking about my warm-ups and make sure I create the time to actually get this in there. So
It's just 25 minutes, but also it's like it's all of 25 minutes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Very, very last thing. How much is too much? Like you've talked about with the 2x10, because I'm imagining people listening to this podcast be like, I'm gonna BFR all day, every day for the rest of my life. Is there a problem with this? Is like, do we need to be deloading BFR? Is too much too much? What's a general
Yeah.
protocol?
Yeah, I mean, here are some of the things that I've found just from integrate. I mean, I've been using it with athletes since 2017, and I use it for myself for my own rehab from knee surgery in 2015. So I've literally been doing this for 11 years now. One, yes, you have to deload from it. There is just like diminishing returns after a period of time. Um, Generally, what I've found is it's about like 6 to 8 weeks. Um, I will run like front squat finishers, like I said, for CrossFit athletes for 4 to 6 weeks, and then we won't touch it again for 4 weeks, and then we'll come back to it. But I always try and time it so that we're finishing the cycle a week or so before competition, because I want that adaptation to be pretty fresh. And I think the same thing would be true for like your lunge protocols, your wall ball protocols, and things like that. Um, I usually only integrate BFR in like mixed training, in like strength training, 2 to 3 times per week. Two is much more typical. Um, I don't know if I have like a research reason for that, because I've even seen like high frequency BFR training in the research to that, that shows positive adaptations. I just think that if you're a healthy athlete, which you're a healthy athlete in this case, you also need to do some of the neuromuscular work and some speed work and things like that. And BFR is almost counter to those things. So 2 to 3 sessions per week for like the BFR strength work, 3 sessions per week for your endurance work. The post IPC, you're not going to want to do that more than once or twice in the week, to be honest. Like it's really gross. And it's kind of time consuming because you're adding 2 to 3 minutes of extra rest to each interval. So if you're doing 5 sets of an interval piece, you've added 15 minutes to the interval piece, but you did make it a little bit more potent. So, in some sense, it's a time saver because it reduces the total volume. You don't have to do quite so much zone 2 work. If you're doing 3x10 minutes, it's 25 minutes, 3 days per week versus 60 minutes, 3 days per week. So it's a big time saver there. But also if you're using it for other applications, like there's pump up time, there's deflate time, you got to get your cuffs out. You got to make sure they're charged if you have Bluetooth cuffs. So there's like other components to it as well.
Yeah. All right, Kyle, conscious of your time. This has been epic. How can people find out more about you, and how can they work with you?
Yeah, I've got a couple different places. So I'm pretty active on Instagram, Kyle Ruth _coaching. I have a school platform where I post about stuff like this on a regular basis. On a weekly basis, I'm uploading content about deadlift strength, BFR, breathing protocols and all that stuff. The school platform is just the Ruth Performance Lab. And I've got a link in bio on my Instagram where you can just go in, click it, enter your email, and you're going to be logged in on the school platform. You can just kind of like follow along with all this kind of performance related stuff that I like to talk about. And then, I think that's pretty much it at this point.
Yeah. And I think just to finish that closing piece off for you, you are currently full as a coach, but you are doing consultations, and you have a mentorship program that you just launched. Anything you want to say about that?
It's also full right now, but I am actively accepting new inquiries for the mentorship. It's a one-on-one mentorship where really we will just work together to build out exactly what what your learning objectives and try and leverage some of the experience that I've got working with athletes with all this, these variety of training methods and things like that, and try and help you come up with good systems for it. So, the same thing, links in bio if you want to apply there, but there is a wait list on that right now.
Love it, Kyle. An absolute pleasure. Always love chatting with you. Thank you for sharing all your knowledge. And I will report back. You will see my finishing time after Hyrox, and it will be faster than 1:15. And I will credit that to this call. So thank you, buddy.
Entirely only to this call.
Only to this call. All right,
Kyle. All right. Thanks, Ed.
Before we say goodbye, here's one crazy statistic for you. Did you know that almost 40% of people who listen to the show don't actually subscribe to it? Now, I didn't think that was a big deal until I actually learned about the power of hitting subscribe. For you, the listener, you get to stay up to date when we drop episodes on a weekly basis. But for us as a podcast, it really helps our visibility and helps us attract great brands and great listeners to help grow this podcast. So if you enjoyed this episode or you're a big fan of the show, please do us a massive favor and hit subscribe. Thank you so much.